Extra footage. Forgive the grammar. This is my first post in a long time lurker. This happened to be about a month ago, and I still cannot get over it. I love horror and things that terrify people, so naturally, I wanted to create something that would scare people. I've watched Marble Hornets and 12 Tribes and a few others, so I wanted to make a series about a creepypasta monster. I love the story of the Rake, so I started making a video series about it, which I'm refusing to do anymore. I started filming little bits and pieces between some family stuff over the summer, and finally wanted to do a big scene out in the woods. In my backyard, there's a thick grove of these pine trees before normal forest, so I planned a bit of suspense building there. Now, I hadn't charged the camera the day I was gonna film, so I took my sister's camera without her knowing to film with, figuring I'll just give it back later. I went out, filmed some jumpy bits in this little forest, pretended to be scared and all that, and then went home to upload it onto my computer and set it up for editing the next day. When I plugged it in, its upload timer said about 2 hours, which is really weird, because a half-hour of footage takes about 6 minutes to go onto the computer. I thought since her camera was a little older, it took the computer a little longer to process, so I left it to upload and came back to it later, not really thinking anything of it. Now this is where stuff gets really fucking weird. I check back later, it tells me I have 6 hours of footage, not 30 minutes. It finally dawns on me that my sister might have stuff recorded and that's why it took so long. I pull up video and out of curiosity, I browse through some of the footage. A lot of it was just normal stuff, hanging out with friends, filming birds and animals and our dog, funny little video she had made with her friends, but around the end of the 2 hours, just before all my stuff was recorded, there was a really dark screen but still some sound. I cut the rest of the footage and tried to brighten the dark bits. I got it sort of bright enough to see this girl's face and nearly freaked the fuck out. The girl was a friend of my sister, and she was in this weird dark room. The footage itself was this. The girl, who's called Mira, was holding the camera way too close to her face, and her eyes were super wide, and her pupils dilated. She looked dirty, and her hair was everywhere and greasy looking, in this messy bun thing. Mira was muttering in this raspy voice about the trees, my big trees, and panting a lot. The whole time she's walking around, and the camera is going up and down against her face. She stops, and then puts the camera up, like when you see those pictures of people who hold the camera up and angle it down to take a profile picture or something like that, and look straight into it. Mira starts muttering about fucking rabbits, those goddamn rabbits, and the whole time she's just staring into the camera. She does this creepy ass grin then, and goes, I'll get them all, and just stares silently, still fucking smiling. This goes on for like 30 seconds, and then she just looks left for another 30 seconds. After that, the camera cuts into my footage. Now I'm freaking out and just noping the way out of my room. I show the clip to my sister and ask her if this is a joke or a prank or something, and she freaks out just like me and says she had no idea this was even on there. Then she tells me and she stopped being friends with Mira a while ago because she was acting crazy all the time. However, this clip was the scariest incident she had seen. She wanted to get rid of it because it scared her, and to never talk to Mira again. We have no idea what she meant by rabbits or trees or who them are, or even how she got the camera at all. We still aren't sure a whole month later, and I'm terrified that me and my sister might be them. Sorry if this is not super scary or anything, but it scared the shit out of me. Videotape for hours by my dad's stalker. Let me begin with a pinch of backstory. My dad and uncle are identical twins. They live within a 5-minute walking distance of each other, and both work in the mental health care field. Most of their patients are normal people who are just down on their luck. but every so often they encounter rather disturbed individuals. Now let's begin. This story takes place about 9 or 10 years ago when I was still in high school. My parents lived on a busy street, but it had a carriage lane running next to it with far less traffic. There was a grassy island that ran between the two streets, though technically it was the only one street. Like many introverted, punky high school kids, I skateboarded a lot. I would set up ramps in the driveway or go to the carriage lane on my street and dick around on my board. I would spend hours out there. While I was busy being a high schooler, my dad and my uncle were busy living out their careers. A lady came to visit my uncle. I'm not sure of what exactly what, but was relatively disturbed. She wasn't off the walls crazy and she wouldn't stick out in a crowd, but if you chatted with her, you would notice something was off. She was a relatively new patient for my uncle, only have seen in a handful of times. One day she ran into my dad at the store. "Dr. Frankfurt," she said as she greeted my dad. Instantly my dad knew that this lady was mistaking him for his brother. My dad is extremely good at remembering names and faces. He politely explained to her that she must be mistaking him for his brother. The lady became very standoffish and quickly left the store. My dad didn't think too much of the interaction and continued running his errands. A couple of days passed, and my uncle calls my dad up, telling him about a patient he just saw who accused my uncle as actually being my dad and pretending to be my uncle. I'll pause in case you need to reread that last part. After my dad and my uncle chatted for a little bit, they concluded that it was the lady that ran into my dad at the store. The lady's sessions with my uncle started to dwindle and are all focusing on her accusing my uncle for being my dad. Eventually, the lady informs my uncle, who she thinks is my dad, that she will no longer be requiring his services. Time passes and nothing much happens. My dad and uncle go about their lives helping people through depression, anxiety, and a host of other common mental issues. I continue skateboarding in front of my house. Then one day, my dad notices that he's being followed, both in his car and on foot. He quickly realizes it's this lady. He's not too worried, and he's in a public area like a grocery store, so he decides to talk to the lady. Before he can even get out a hello, she goes off on him, saying that what he was doing is awful, illegal, and immoral. She is still convinced that he is pretending to be my uncle and meeting up with his patients. My dad tries to calmly explain the situation. Identical twins, same profession, living in the same neighborhood, etc. She claims she has proof. My dad suggests that they meet with the police then, and she is more than happy to oblige. When they meet up at the station, she presents tapes upon tapes, saying that it is proof that my dad is pretending to be my uncle. My dad, and the officer helping them start to watch the tapes. Sure enough, there are hours and hours of footage of her following my dad around, following my uncle around, camping out at both their offices, filming the front of our house and filming me skateboarding. Apparently, there was a lot of footage of me skateboarding. She would park her car in the carriage lane, set up the camera, and just let it roll. The officer asked my dad if he wants a restraining order on this woman. He declines. All my dad asks is that she get a firm official warning to stop following and filming my dad, my uncle, and me. The woman gets the warning, and we never see her again. She did make a point in asking the police to investigate what she thought my dad was doing. From the footage, they concluded nothing illegal was going on. Now, most of this story isn't that creepy. My dad and my uncle are trained at dealing with mentally unwell people, and the lady never approached me in person. But it makes me wonder what other disturbed people are out there, with video cameras getting smaller and being placed in every phone. How much footage do people have of us? I've always wondered if I could get a hold of that footage and see how much of me she actually had. Then again, I do like to sleep at night. Have you seen my dog? This story is actually a series of events that I hadn't thought about in a while, so I apologize if it gets a little bit long. I like to try and get as many details as I possibly can. The first event took place back when I was only 10, 11 years old. Me and a couple friends had recently gotten into making our own little movies. They were terribly edited and didn't really have much of a point to them, but they kept us occupied. So one weekend, they show up at my door and tell me they're planning on making a new movie, and I should come with them to go check out some good filming areas. My mom asked where we were going, and the two of them responded with a park down the street. She nodded and I went off with them. The end of my street led into a large clearing with a park and a large hill that many people would sled down during the winter, called Suicide Hill, and yes, it's actually called that. You can look it up. The road continued into a bunch of dirt paths that split off into the woods. The one we took leading into a second clearing, filled with really tall grass. The path eventually ended with what seemed to be something of a biking area, with little ramps that some people had made in the dirt. We hung around there for a while before my friends decided that that was enough for the day, and that we should go back. I brought my dad's camera and tripod with me, so they waited for me at the park while I cleaned up. As soon as I had finished, I took my stuff and walked back along the path that led through the field with the long grass. I got halfway through before the grass started rustling loudly. I had assumed it was either an animal of some kind or my friends playing a prank on me, so I yelled something along the lines of, "Anyone there?" trying to go along with their joke. The rustling halted for a moment before whatever was causing it really quickly ran the other way and into the forest. I didn't see them very much before they made it out of my sight and into the woods, but whoever it was looked to be tall and seemed like a woman. Although I wasn't completely sure. Being young, I didn't think much of it. It definitely creeped me out a fair bit at the time, but I eventually convinced myself that it was just my imagination playing tricks on me, and I'd probably just seen a deer or something like that. The next one happened a couple months later. Near where I lived was a street that curved around, and eventually came back out onto my street. Most people just called it the Villages, and it was our equivalent of the ghetto. I was walking our dog around the area, and was just about to cross back onto my street when a small, very normal-looking white car slowly pulls up beside me. My heart immediately starts pumping. The windows roll down, and a woman with incredibly long hair sticks her head out and asks if I've seen her dog. Apparently the dog had run away and she was looking for it. I silently shake my head no and begin to continue walking. My dog's pulling on his leash at this point and wants to get on with the walk. She tells me to hold on a second, so reluctantly I do. She tells me that it couldn't have gone far and asks me to get in the car because she has photos of the dog in there, and she wants me to help her come along and find it. All of my red flags go off at the obvious attempt, and I end up saying nothing to her and booking it towards my house. As far as I could tell, she hadn't followed me, and after a couple weeks of not seeing any signs of her car or her, I decided that I must have somehow scared her off or something. I was afraid to tell anyone about it, so I guess cognitive dissonance worked its magic and convinced me that I was fine, and I didn't need to tell anyone because she wouldn't show up again. Flash forward about 2 years later, and I'm about 13 years old. At this point, I've almost completely forgotten about the woman. It still hadn't completely dissipated from my mind though, but I wasn't as paranoid as I was for the couple months after it happened. I got into the habit of walking the dog at night when I went on my normal route, which no longer included the Villages during the day. There were too many people around. When I tried to walk him, he sat down and refused to continue forward unless I took him to the park to meet all those people. Now, unlike most kids, I wasn't too afraid of being out at night, and since it was only down my street, my parents were fine with it too. After a couple months of doing this, the third event happens. As I'm walking back home, there's this large driveway that leads into a parking lot for an apartment building. A car slowly backs into the driveway until it's about halfway down, at which point it stops and turns its headlights off. I thought it was strange and continued across the mouth of the driveway. As soon as I reach the other side, I can hear the car slowly driving out of the driveway. I speed up the pace a bit, trying to ignore the car as best as I can. It eventually makes its way next to me, still driving incredibly slow. I glance over at it, and my heart immediately sunk into my stomach as I realized it was the exact same white car. I decided to give the most menacing glare I could muster straight towards the driver's seat, which in all honesty, probably wasn't that menacing. The car's driver, who I can only assume was the same woman as before, must have been unaffected by it, as she continues to drive up closer to me. At this point, I'm fucking terrified, and just ready to make a run for it again. The road was completely empty at this time of night, and I'm hoping that by some miracle, somebody else drives down it, you know? The white car eventually turns for the sidewalk, and I can only assume what it was trying to do there. As soon as the tire crosses onto the pavement, my beagle, who was just about the least threatening dog there was, immediately planted himself on the ground and refused to move forward. I tried tugging on him, but the dog doesn't budge. The car eventually comes all the way onto the sidewalk, blocking my path completely now. I had nowhere to go. Right as I was about to leave the dog and book it, the door clicks open. It only opens about halfway, before my dog, at that moment, lets out the most menacing sound I think I've ever heard. It was too dark to see into the windows at that time of night, so I still make the justified assumption that it was that same woman driving the car. Whoever it was slams the door shut and zooms off into the distance. I'm left there, still panting, scared out of my mind, and thinking my dog probably saved my life. I even give him a thank you. I get home as quickly as possible and end up telling my story to my parents. Everything that happened. They're pretty worried about me, but I tell them I'm fine. And for the rest of the year, the three of us are all pretty paranoid about it. And I didn't walk anywhere, save for school, which was very close by, without somebody else with me. I ended up getting a phone, which they told me to use if I ever saw her again. Since then, I've moved out of the city, and I luckily haven't seen the woman or her car for a fourth time. I'm not really a big fan of white cars anymore, though, and I always get goose pimples whenever I see a white car at night. To this day, I still have no clue who the woman was when she started following me, or, as sinister as it sounds, if she's even stopped yet. Drunk guy wanted to be in our movie. I posted this story on another subreddit, but I felt that Reddit Let's Not Meet would be the perfect place for it. So here's a little background. It was the early summertime, and my brother and I had planned to meet a few of our friends at a local frisbee golf course, who weren't actually going to play frisbee. My brother and my friend Lisa had an online story that they wrote together, so we were going to film a book trailer for them. The frisbee golf course was the perfect place for this, as it was a heavily wooded area. So on that day, we rode our bikes to the park. There were the five of us: Lisa, Jack, Kate, my brother, Farron, and me. There wasn't a lot of people on the golf course that day, so we set up our camera a little ways off of the course. We ended up spending a lot of time dinkling around with the cameras and costumes before we actually started filming, but we made good progress. We had filmed over half of the trailer before we noticed the guy. Actually, it was more like he noticed us. Out of the blue came this man. He was kind of pudgy, and he looked like he was in his late 20s. His shirt was stained, and he carried a can of beer in his right hand. "Hey," he said, "are you guys filming a movie?" His speech wasn't slurred or anything like that, but something still seemed off about him to me. Lisa had picked up on the vibes too, because it took a long time for her to answer. "Yeah," she finally said. "Oh, great," the man yelled excitedly. "You know, I auditioned for a movie once. Did you know that? I auditioned once for a death scene. Do you want to see my death scene?" By this point, we were a little bit freaked out, but we said yes. Kate and I began to move one of the cameras so that it was facing him. He looked right around at us. "Are you recording? Are you filming me? I can start, right?" We nodded yes, dead silent. We had no idea what this guy was going to do. We weren't disappointed. without letting go of his beer. The guy sort of fell on the nearest tree, sliding down it slowly, like a cat using a scratching post, making out like he had been shot. His feet dug wide trenches into the dirt, and we could hear the bark snagging on his t-shirt. His nails got torn up from clawing the tree. Then, the whole time, he made this weird guttural noise like he was in pain. He laid on the ground for a while, and we weren't sure what to do. Before we could react, he quickly stood up. "Was that good?" "I did good, didn't I?" We assured him that it was good. He looked pleased with himself. "Hey, okay, send that to my email. Will you send that to my email? Send that to my email, okay?" "Yeah, we'll do that," Jack muttered, although we had no idea who this guy even was, let alone his email address. He didn't leave either. He just sort of stared at us for a while. It got to the point where Lisa had been faking a phone call from her mother. "Hey guys, we gotta go." So we bid our drunk movie star adieu and hightailed the hell out of the woods. For good measure, we climbed trees in the park and stayed there until we were confident he had left. So, creepy drunk guy in the woods, let's not meet. Also, we have no idea what your email address is. I'm sorry.